This element in the driving question for AP Statistics was done with a group of teachers with whom I worked a couple of summers ago in northern Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania had just recently announced that one of the casinos for the state was going to be built in the community just outside where the school district was located. And so these AP teachers were rather concerned about what the impact was going to be on their community. And they decided to focus their project on that. And their driving question became, how can we best inform community residents on the statistical data related to wins and losses in casino gambling? And the hope was that these community members would see that, yes, you can certainly have fun at a casino, but in the long period of time in which gambling occurs based on all of the different games in the casino, certainly the payoff was not going to be good in the long run. And as we move on to the next element with the need to know, you can see that the picture here is an engagement ring. And the reason why this picture is used is because oftentimes we don't necessarily need to know information until it directly affects us. And in this particular case, gentlemen, if you're in the session here and you've ever had to buy an engagement ring, you know that all of a sudden you become experts in the cut, clarity, and color of diamonds. And ladies, if you were ever on the receiving end of a diamond, you know you also become the experts in the cut, color, and clarity to make sure that you, in fact, received a really great diamond from your significant other. But otherwise, that's not information that we need to know. So in the case of our students, they frequently ask in class, why do we need to know this information? And the standard answer is you need to know it for the test. So project-based learning really attempts to change this, and in doing so, creating a reason for those students to need to know the information, creating that engagement factor so that the students are motivated and the students want to answer the driving question and want to do that not only in order to get a good grade at the end of the unit for the test or at the end of the course on that AP exam for that 4 or a 5. So how do we create that need to know for our students? And certainly it begins with creating something that is engaging for them, and rather than simply stating, today we're going to start a new project on, how can you create an element of engagement as you launch this project? And for this AP World History example, if any of you teach AP World History, you know certainly that it is extremely content heavy, as it is covering the world and the history of the world. And one of the big pieces in AP World History is looking at the similarities and differences between the religions of the world and how those similarities and differences have really affected world history. And thus the creation of this project, because the religion piece is such a fundamental concept in world history. What we have for this example is a case in which students are brought into class, and in the class awaiting them for an engaging debate is a panel of experts about how the different world religions have actually created conflict throughout historical periods of time, and how religion relates to and really engages many areas of the world in conflict, as we've certainly seen in the past and we still currently see today. And so that immediately sparks the interest of the students rather than the simple memorization of the similarities and the differences of those world religions. And taking this project a little bit further, then that same panel came back for this project and for the conclusion of the project, in which the presentations made by the students were on how to create more awareness on religious diversity to promote the elimination of conflict in the future. And as we move on to the next element of voice and choice, we can look at this as, all of us in human nature want to have a choice in what we learn. And we know that most of our AP students have chosen to take our courses because they are, in fact, interested in those. My students tend to be political junkies. Maybe your students really like the STEM courses and want to do things that are math related and science related because those are the things that they like. So they do have some voice and choice by simply taking our courses. However, the question becomes, how can we actually build in voice and choice into our projects for our students? And that voice and choice piece becomes extremely important in terms of getting the students invested in the project. And depending on how you want to create your project, you can create a little more voice and choice and leave it wide open, as in my example, in which the students actually created the entire project. Or it could be much more defined in terms of here's your topic, and maybe you have the option in how you want your final product to be as an outcome. In the terms of this particular example in AP Physics, a colleague of mine and I sat down to discuss how we could actually implement project-based learning in the AP Physics class. And here in South Central Pennsylvania, we are located very close to Hershey, which has an amusement park. And every time that Hershey creates a brand new roller coaster ride, they set out to the community a contest to name the new ride. And so in my discussions with my physics colleague, we thought about using that same idea or concept, but relating it back to physics. So rather than actually having the students name the roller coaster ride, in this example, the students are now actually designing the roller coaster ride. And now I never took an AP Physics course, and so I can promise you that I am reading off of a list that was provided to me by the AP Physics teacher. But the students are looking at linear and circular motion, speed and acceleration, force, energy, strain and stress, and static versus dynamic loads, and applying all of those concepts to a very authentic real-world application. And even going further than that, and not just designing it for the teacher, but actually designing it for the Hershey Entertainment Group in order to get some feedback from the Hershey Entertainment Group, which directly leads us into that revision and reflection element of project-based learning. All too frequently, teachers, AP or non-AP, leave this element out of their classes, whether it's in a project-based learning setting or not. So the revision and the reflection piece becomes extremely important because as the students reflect on what they are doing and are continually revising what they are doing, they are learning that content more deeply and gaining a better understanding of it, as well as creating a very professional end product. Think about how many times in our own careers that we have to revise and as we reflect on our own practices. So this particular example for AP Literature and Composition looks at the study of Shakespeare in the classroom. And English is certainly an area in which teachers tend to do very well with the revision piece, as students have to revise their own writing, but this really takes a whole new twist on it. And for this particular project, a teacher with whom I recently worked in Indiana had been a part of a program while she was in college called Shakespeare Behind Bars, in which Shakespeare is actually brought into the prison system for hardened criminals and murderers, rapists, some of the worst criminals, but is used as a tool to do some rehabilitation with them and to give them rewards for good behavior. So this teacher decided that in studying Shakespeare, not only would her students be analyzing the Shakespeare, but they would also be writing using Shakespearean terms and applying it to current day scenarios and situations. And for that revision and reflection piece, she was going to have her students actually send their scripts to the prisoners and have them revise and review them. So the students weren't actually going to the prison system, but still getting that revision and reflection piece and building a sense of community, even though those prisoners are behind bars. Now, I know this one kind of might seem a little far-fetched to many teachers. However, this same type of a project could be used and revised to use a different audience instead of the prison system. Now we get to our final element, which is the public audience. And with the public audience, now we have added that final element of creating a very professional product that the students are extremely proud of and have not just completed in order to get that good grade, which most of our students at the AP level are after. So implementing that public audience adds a little extra something beyond that of what the teacher provides in terms of feedback, because they may want to do it well for us, for the grade and only the grade, but add the public audience, and now a new sense of pride comes with the work that the students do. In this example, it happens to be yet another colleague of mine, so I must brag and say that I have a lot of really great AP teachers with whom I work in my own district. But this particular piece deals with looking at solvents and how moles and molarity and mass work together, and surfactants and dilution, and having the students look at what is the best combination of household chemicals that can be used to create an effective yet inexpensive desk cleaner. And so it sounds like a really great project, and you can do it certainly for the teacher, but in order to add that final element of having a public audience, my colleague asked for the custodial staff to come into his classroom and to listen to the presentations of the students and actually choose which particular cleaner worked the best. So we know that they had done a lot of revising and reflecting as they went along to do this, but now creating that outside audience and also creating a sense of community within their own school. As you bring in the custodial staff, a group of individuals that are very typically left out of the school community. So what an excellent way to build community between the students and the custodial staff, and to have them gain a new respect for that particular group of people. Now we've covered all of the elements, and I'm going to move into our second focus area here in terms of, what does this project-based learning in AP classroom look like? How does it work, and how can we use this design process and implement it in our classrooms to best prepare our students for the AP exam? And I want to focus on the fact that yes, you can still use traditional teaching tools. You don't have to throw them out the window. Project-based learning can be enhanced by some of those traditional teaching tools, and I'm just going to talk to you about a couple of the different methods that I use in my own project-based learning classroom. And the first of those is small group instruction. And small group instruction has been one of the most effective methods that I have used and that I have found with my students. And I really like this because even in a traditional classroom, for the AP setting and with all of the content that needs to be included in the course, it's inevitable that students are going to have to be assigned readings at home. Even if I were to lecture every day for an 80-minute period for the entire semester, I would never be able to cover all of that content for my students. So with the small group instruction, what I've now done is allowed my students the opportunity to differentiate for themselves, to determine whether or not they need additional help on a particular topic, or to go into more detail about a particular topic. So 3 to 4 times a week, I will hold a small group session that will last from 20 to 25 minutes. And those topics are ones that I have designated as topics that typically give the students a little more trouble. And I also allow my students to request particular topics for small group instruction. Small group is not required. However, it is certainly encouraged. Sometimes I may only have 3 to 5 students that want to join me for small group. Sometimes it might be 8 to 10, and in some cases I will have all 30 of my students stand up for small group instruction, which means I will have to run small group multiple times throughout the period in order to really have it truly be small group instruction. And during these small group instruction times, what I do is a little bit of direct instruction on the topic, as well as some discussion with the students and some guided practice in order to ensure that they have grasped the content and the concepts very well. Of course, I have those repeat offenders in small group, and they'd like to do small group all the time. And sometimes I have students that only come to small group once a week or once every other week. Again, it's not a requirement, but it's a way in which I differentiate for my students. I also use podcasting in my classroom. That's not to say that I never lecture. On occasion, I will do a whole class lecture. But rather than utilizing the class time for lecturing purposes, I create shortened podcasts or mini lectures that last anywhere from 5 to 8 minutes to maybe a maximum of 10 minutes. And the students will have several podcasts per chapter, with usually 3 to 4 chapters per unit. And the podcasts are expected as a requirement for the students. However, I don't always double check to make sure they are listening to the podcast. It puts some of the onus on them for learning. However, they can expect on occasion, maybe once a week, to have a quiz that would encompass some of what they should have read from their chapter and or the podcasts. So I upload my podcasts online, and the students can download them and listen to me ad nauseum if they choose. Sometimes I get parents that will listen to the podcast and will send me messages that they had a discussion at the dinner table about the federalism podcast that they listened to that evening or that afternoon. And so it's a really great way also for the students and the parents to connect what's happening within the classroom. And again, it eliminates the need for me to do a ton of lecturing and allows for more class time for work on the project, which in essence is what we are calling today that flipped classroom. Rather than focusing the direct instruction within the walls of the classroom, it's now done outside of the classroom, and then the more engaging project-based learning can take place once the students come to class. And so this is certainly just an example, probably the biggest example that's out there in terms of a service that is out there for that flipped classroom experience. So you can certainly create your own flipped classroom experience. It does take some time and some effort, but it is certainly well worth it for your students. And now we're going to move into the final piece of this webinar, looking at the exam questions and how the new exam, as the College Board is starting to redefine slowly but surely with the different content areas, currently now focusing on the AP Bio, but looking at the differences between the old exam and the new exam, where the old exam, as you can see from this question, really focused on the content in terms of memorizing it. So either you know this from memory or not. And we have the soccer ball on the slide because that goal that we have as those AP teachers is to ensure that our students get a 4 or 5 on the exam. And with the old exam being merely memorization, it is understandable why many AP classrooms are simply focused on the memorization piece. But if we take a look at the new exam, and this is one of the questions from the new AP Bio exam, now students are not being required to merely memorize the content. Certainly, we still have the same goal of getting that 4 or 5 on the exam, and so now we have to have our students thinking critically about the content. So not only do they need to know the content, but they need to know how to apply the content. And this particular example, of course, has potential answers in the multiple choice format. That hasn't changed. I simply didn't have enough room on the slide. But now they have to think critically about that content. So it's quite a different change in concept for the College Board. And as I said before, now we're moving toward that format. So it is really our charge as AP teachers to go back to what we see as our ideal graduate and prepare them for that and have them be able to think critically about our content in our AP courses. And on that note, we'll go ahead and we will move into the question format and portion of the webinar. So any questions that you have, please feel free to ask them at this time and type them into the webinar, and I will go ahead and answer them. And Melissa, I see that you are asking if we have, if I can give you any other ideas for particular AP courses that I haven't mentioned here today. And that really leads me into my next slide. The Edmodo Community that we have started, that BIE has started, that is available and free. And as you can see from the slide, it is quite a great resource for professional development. And right now we have over 1,800 members of the BIE community on Edmodo. And those 1,800 members are helping to share resources. So you could post a forum question in the community asking for other ideas, and hopefully would get some responses from our community members, because while I certainly understand project-based learning and teach an AP course, I don't teach every AP course, and I don't have the knowledge base for every AP course. But as I get additional resources, and I do currently have some other resources, those will be posted on the BIE community. So please make sure that you do join our community. You simply have to register with Edmodo and then find the BIE community to join up. And not only do we have the community discussion portion of this and the interaction portion, but you can also see there on the slide that there is the collection feature, in which we have a lot of different videos that have been uploaded that show exemplary projects from many different schools from around the country that utilize project-based learning. And we also have some documents as well that can be downloaded for free that you can use to help you plan out your project-based learning experiences for your students. And I see Shannon has a question. How often do you quiz or test your students? As I said before, traditional teaching tools do not have to go out the window, and certainly there is a new way to assess in project-based learning. And because it is an AP course, I feel like I need to use some of the more traditional assessments as well, which include end of the unit tests that I give at the end of every unit. And they are multiple choice questions, and they are the new format of multiple choice questions that the College Board is going to, because I feel like if I use those higher order thinking questions that my students have to use the application piece for, they will be better prepared and will get that 4 or 5 on the AP exam. And so frequently my students come back and tell me that my tests are much harder than the College Board tests. So I do give those end of the unit tests, as well as a period of time prior to the end of the unit in which they will receive a practice exam question from the essay portion of the exam, so that they are better prepared for the essay portion and the writing part of the exam, as well as those quizzes that I may give, as I said before, once or twice a unit, sometimes 3 times a unit, just depending on how frequently I want to do a surprise check to make sure that my students are in fact reading and are listening to the podcasts. However, as they are progressing through the project, I can also assess them formatively to ensure that they're doing the reading and listening of the podcast, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in that traditional quiz type format. All right, and I see Martha is asking, how much time should the average project take? That really is dependent on you and your course, Martha. I like to set mine up again per unit, so I have 5 units. However, based on the percentage of questions that the College Board dictates for each unit, the units that receive a larger percentage of questions, I do create much more detailed and more in-depth projects that would take a longer period of time. For those units that are a little bit shorter, I would create a shorter project and or potentially integrate that project into another unit, or combine 2 units into one project. So there's no real hard and fast rule, Martha, but it's really dependent upon you and what you prefer in terms of being the expert in your own content area. And finally, I'd like to mention, in addition to our Edmodo community that we have that has become very active, we do have our regular website, the bieorg website, and you can download videos there. You can do our project search feature, in which you might get some ideas for projects. They may not be exactly what you want to implement in your classroom, but you can certainly customize them to fit into your classroom, as well as we still have all of our downloadable forms on our bie.org site. And on that note, I would like to thank you for spending just about an hour with me, and I look forward to having some interaction with you on the Edmodo Community site. Thank you so much, and have a great evening, everyone.